Welcome to Worldview Matters, discussing controversial issues, discerning current events, defending biblical Christianity. No topic off limits. And now, here's your host, David Fiorazzo.
Hey friends, thank you so much for tuning in and for sharing the show on social media. We're trying to get out there on as many outlets as possible. I want to thank our friends at Harbingers Daily for their support. Can't wait to talk to Andy Woods today. Just want to give you a little teaser coming up this week since this is Monday. Is it Monday? No, it's Tuesday. What day is this? No, it's Monday. We're going to be talking to George Carneal. We're going to be talking to Scott Shera, John Haller, the rest of this week. But I want to bring in Pastor Andy Woods. He's a friend. He's an amazing pastor. I love this man and his teaching. One of my favorite Bible teachers, by the way. Andy Woods Ministries. He's at Sugar Land Bible Church in Texas. He's the author of many books, including Babylon, the Bookends of Prophetic History. The Middle East Meltdown is a great book, as well as his many others. But he's president of Chafer Theological Seminary and founder of Andy Woods Ministries. Andy, brother, welcome to Worldview Matters. Thanks for tuning in, or thanks for being with us and tuning in.
Yeah, David, thanks for having me. Good to be here with you today.
Yeah, appreciate your time. Now, you just got back from a conference yourself. Where were you just recently?
I was with Tom Hughes, who you may know, out in Rockwall, Texas, which is about 5 hours from here, the Houston area, where I live. Just had a great prophecy conference. So
excellent. Excellent. Now, can people still watch that? I'm sure it's recorded and available somewhere.
Yeah, I think if you went over to his Hope for Our Times website, you could get all the information on that.
Okay, sounds good. And you're busy. How about your schedule, upcoming schedule? Is it on your website, Andy Woods Ministries?
Yeah, if you go to andywoodsministries.org, you should be able to find, upcoming things that I'm involved in. I mean, one of which is we have Curtis Bowers coming to our church October the 8th.
Awesome. Wow. Fantastic.
And another one is we're having our own prophecy conference next year, early next year, February, I think it's 23rd and 24th.
So you're doing one at Sugar Land?
Yeah, we're going to have David Reagan, Olivia Melnick, myself, Lev Shalom is going to lead in worship and song. And then Russ Miller, who I think you know,
absolutely,
is going to be holding up the creation side of it.
Excellent. Fantastic. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. Of course, I want to direct people to your pastor's point of view. 271 of those you've done. Are you tired yet? Because you cover a lot of topics. I mean, looking at these Gog, Magog, Kings of the East, globalism, Mark of the Beast technology, occult revival. I want to encourage people to check out that he's on YouTube and also Subsplash. You can subscribe there. But Pastor's Point of View. Andy, this first topic I really wanted to ask you about, we weren't planning on talking about this, but then I heard a friend of mine, Steve Smotherman, a pastor from Legacy Church in Albuquerque, New Mexico, put out a call to impeach his governor. Now, pastors don't typically do that. I wanted to get your take on this because the Johnson Amendment has prevented a lot of pastors from speaking out. They are unnecessarily self-censoring when it comes to, quote, political issues, which are really moral issues. But his church was sued a couple years ago for keeping his church open during COVID. And I just pulled this off the news today. The FDA has okayed new coronavirus vaccine as the season is coming up, right? Flu, whatever the season they want to call it. But the vaccines are going to be promoted again. And apparently the New Mexico governor said this, Andy. Actually, let me just give you Steve's response. He said, the governor's mandate to restrict our constitutional right to bear arms. This is a different issue now. This is back to the bearing arms and the church issue. So I'm kind of talking to you about two different things. The governor's mandate to restrict our constitutional right to bear arms is in direct violation of our Second Amendment right to bear arms. She has gone too far in her reaction to the recent gun violence that has occurred. We are deeply saddened for the families and the victims involved in the recent shooting, but we do not condone the actions of the responsible party and demand that the party be brought to justice to the fullest extent of the law. But he said the governor has reacted in an emotional way with instability in complete disregard for the other 2 million responsible citizens who live in the state of New Mexico. So he's calling for her to be held accountable. Andy Woods, he's been sued. His church has been sued for keeping his church open and wanting to hold services even on Christmas Eve a few years ago for COVID. So he won one of those legal battles, and now it seems like she's doing another power grab. Just your thoughts on what other pastors are going through, and this is right next to Texas.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great that the pastor called for her impeachment, because she should be impeached. I mean, what people didn't understand is that our rights that we have, and here we're talking about two: First Amendment right, freedom of religion; Second Amendment right, the right to keep and bear arms. Those come to us from God. You know, the Declaration of Independence says that, you know, over and over again. It couldn't be clearer. And so anybody that holds elective office in this country needs to understand that there are certain rights that cannot be trampled on and cannot be, you know, traversed. And in this particular case, you know, the governor of New Mexico is also on record saying that the Second Amendment is not an absolute right. Well, if the Second Amendment is not an absolute right, then I guess the First Amendment is not an absolute right either. And that's why it's interesting to see her, you know, trample on both.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's no longer functioning legitimately. She's no longer functioning as someone who, you know, respects unalienable, or some say inalienable, rights. You know, in that word alienable is the word lien. If I, David, own a lien against your property, when you sell the property, I get the cash. So the property really doesn't belong to you, it belongs to me. And our founding fathers were wise enough to anchor our rights, First Amendment, Second Amendment, without lien, because they come from, not from man, they come from God. And if man gives them, man can take them away. But if they come from God, man cannot trample on them. And so she's not even functioning within the auspices of our Declaration of Independence. So I'm actually happy to see a courageous pastor call for her impeachment, because she should be impeached.
Yes, and I was also surprised. This is a little thing, but he not only mentioned it on his personal Facebook page, he put it on the Legacy Church Albuquerque, New Mexico Facebook page. And he's always been bold. Obviously, he's stood up for the rights of Christians to worship freely and not be told by government how churches can worship, how long or how many people can enter the church. And he's had that. He's been battling since COVID. And so God bless him for that. This is going to be an interesting theme here today, Andy Woods, because in just a little while, we're going to be talking about how some of America's top law schools are teaching students to abandon the Constitution. Well, when you look at some of these power-grabbing governors or mayors, what we've learned a lot since COVID, haven't we? We've learned a lot on how many of these men and women are going to try to control their citizens, which I think is kind of preparation for future really intense control. Your thoughts on that?
Well, if you go back to the Declaration of Independence, which is our birth certificate as a nation, you know, it fixes our rights from God, and it never says, oh, by the way, these can be suspended if there is some sort of emergency. And by the way, this liberal idea that they didn't have, you know, health problems and emergencies back then is nonsense. They had more emergencies in terms of health issues and plagues and whatever than we have today. So our founders were very clear that our rights come from God and they're unalienable and they can't be suspended. And what they're using is this concept of an emergency to, you know, say that our rights are not absolute. But the truth of the matter is, who defines what an emergency is? You know, these people on the left, a lot of them talk about something called a climate emergency, because they brought into anthropogenic, you know, man-made climate change, which I believe is largely a myth. And so if you open the door to this mindset that our rights can be suspended if there's an emergency, then all of a sudden the door is open to letting them define what an emergency is. And they will, as Lord Acton said, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. they'll just continue to make up emergencies more and more frequently until our, First Amendment rights and Second Amendment rights are whittled down to, about nothing. And so we really need to get back to our founding documents and stand on those. And so I applaud the pastor because he's doing that.
Yes. One more thing he said was he's calling on the New Mexico state legislature to immediately convene a special session to take the appropriate action to have the governor removed from office. He said it's not a political issue. This is a constitutional issue. This is not a Republican or Democrat issue. This strikes at the heart of our constitutional rights, just like what you have been saying, Dr. Andy Woods. And by the way, friends, you can go to andywoodsministries.org and find out more information on Andy and all of his great teachings. But we're going to move on. We have to briefly just talk about this, and then we're already coming up to a break. California passed a bill to strip parents of custody if they don't affirm a child's gender. Now, some of us might be shocked, but it's California, right? I mean, yes, it's still in the United States, but Assembly Bill 957 is known as the Transgender, Gender Diverse, and Intersex Youth Empowerment Act, passed by the California Assembly by a party line vote. The state Senate passed the bill by a 30-9 vote, and this would include, quote, a parent's affirmation of the child's gender identity as part of the health, safety, and welfare of the child, end quote. And Andy, we know Emperor Newsom out there, he's all for this. He's been pushing this for I don't know how long, but tell us a little bit more about this story, what you know about this, and what parents can do.
Well, I just hope people see this for what it is. I mean, there's no other word to describe it other than this is totalitarianism.
Yes.
And, I have kind of a litmus test for helping people discern how close we are to totalitarianism. And that's when the government starts to interfere with the most sacred relationship you have on this earth, other than with your spouse. It's your authority to control the upbringing of your own children. And what is being spoken of here is to strip children away from their parents because they have the wrong political ideology about the transgender movement or whatever. That's just a raw and unbridled totalitarian power grab. And I would remind Emperor Newsom that Moses 3,500 years ago, which is long before Newsom ever showed up, articulated that parents have authority over their own children in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6. People will see it there in verses 4-7. So this is an ancient right that goes all the way back to the time of Moses. And the Emperor Newsom, I guess they call him Gruesome out there, which is an appropriate name, but he's just traversing on something that God gave to the parents. And I don't know how to describe it other than this is evil.
Yep.
I like what was said earlier. We're not dealing with Democrat, Republican anymore.
Right.
We're dealing with good versus evil.
Yes.
Freedom versus totalitarianism.
And this is demonic. Let's just call it what it is. When you are charging parents with child abuse or neglect for not participating in a child's transgenderism. We've got to take our first break already with Dr. Andy Woods. More to come right after this.
Today's show is brought to you by Harbinger's Daily. World news biblically understood. Stay informed at harbingersdaily.com.
Welcome back. We're with Dr. Andy Woods today, andywoodsministries.org. We are talking about another story that's pretty concerning that we kind of touched on earlier. America's law schools, some of them, are teaching students to abandon the Constitution. So at least two large conservative think tanks argue that Yale, Stanford, Harvard, Columbia, and others want to get rid of the Constitution. These are top universities. They put out some of the nation's top and future lawyers. So Andy Woods, you talked about this in your recent pastor's point of view. This is kind of a theme today. This is concerning because we already know how the left thinks about the Constitution. But as you said, we've got to get back to our founding documents and live by them. So what are your concerns about this when law schools are starting to minimize the Constitution of the United States?
Well, a quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln is, "The philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next." And when you're dealing with these elite law schools, I think the article mentions several elite law schools. I think Columbia, Harvard, Yale, a few others are mentioned. I mean, where are future legislators, politicians, leaders in government going to come from? They're going to come from those schools. And so what is happening is you're releasing into spheres of influence a group of people that are functioning with their own standard of what's right and wrong outside of the parameters that our founding fathers, wisely gave us. And that's why this whole thing is so frightening. Now, I was in law school in the early 90s, and it was bad back then. They had developed, I would argue, going back to 1870, the case law method for analyzing the Constitution. In other words, the Constitution means what the judge says it means, not what it actually says. So you spend all your time studying these cases on how the judges have, morphed the Constitution. But what this article goes into is you throw into the mix critical race theory, where people are taught that the Constitution is misogynistic and racist, which it is not, by the way. It was amended 3 times to get rid of slavery and the vestiges of slavery.
Yes.
But if you're taught that it's a racist document, that's another reason to discard it. Okay, so we discard it. Who's going to be in charge? Judges, leaders now just do what's right in their own eyes. And so that's the very sad trajectory in which we're moving.
You reminded me of something in the back of the book of Judges. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. That's a recipe for failure. Andy, I'm just going to quote the article here from J. Kristen Adams, President and General Counsel of the Public Interest Legal Foundation, said they're saying they want to get rid of the Constitution. They're making no secret about it. The stuff they're teaching now is straight up Marxist. There's a big difference from just 10 years ago. The editorial, there was an editorial, I guess, at the New York Times by a Harvard and Yale professor, 2 different professors, and it was titled this: "The Constitution is broken and should not be reclaimed." And they argue that the founding text is inadequate, undemocratic, and should be abandoned. Yeah, Andy, you were studying in the 90s, but they've been beating this drum for quite some time, decades and decades. So are they gaining converts, do you think? Are they gaining influence, or how do you think this is going to go?
Well, I don't think they have the conversion of the people,
Right.
people that are like us, the rank and file, but that's not the issue. The issue is you don't have to you don't have to convince the population of something. All you got to do is convince the people that have the levers of power of something. And so that's why we're seeing more and more rulings, that have absolutely nothing to do with fidelity, to the text of the United States Constitution. And here's the deal. The Constitution, if you were to read it, it would span 11 pages. Okay. All you have to do is read 11 pages, including the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, to understand the Constitution. So the Constitution stands for limited, minimal government. That's its premise. So to bring in, and I like what the article says, Marxism, which is maximum government, you have to scrap the document on the books that promotes limited government. And that's what this whole thing is about. These progressives, they never really tell you what they're progressing us toward. What they're progressing us toward is maximum government redistribution of the wealth, totalitarianism. So all of these attacks on the Constitution, whether it be the case law method, the evolving Constitution, it's a living document. It means what the judge says it is. Or most recently infused into the mix, critical race theory, the agenda is to scrap limited government and progress us, they call it progress, into maximum government. And, with our immigration crisis, just people need to ask themselves a simple question. Why are people all over the world flocking to get into this country if the Constitution is so oppressive? I mean, they're flocking to get here because, other than the Bible, the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution are the two most important documents that have ever existed, because they give more people more political and economic freedom than any other documents in the history of mankind. And just ask the people fleeing tyranny, if in fact that is true.
Yeah, I think they conveniently ignore that, why people from around the world want to come to America, as bad as the left says America is, right, and oppressive. And by the way, that's a Marxist 101. You get the groups to fight against each other, the oppressed versus the oppressor, get them distracted by all these little issues here, and then they take power up at the top with executive orders and whatever else. But Andy, we've got to move on. It's going by really fast today, as I expected it would with you. You talked about this story in your recent Pastor's Point of View. Sports fans, Major League Baseball is testing hands-free entry for fans utilizing facial authentication. So AI security is basically what they're doing. They're going to allow ticketed fans to walk directly into stadiums. It's a convenient new arrival method that the league says won't compromise on safety and security. So, Andy, I was just going through the notes in this article, and it said, it's not like they're going to scan you out and find you in the stadium and, like facial recognition. But, it's contactless, it's hands-free. And how does this all work, and what are your concerns about it?
Well, my concerns are the social credit score system, which is not conspiracy talk. It's actually used in China. As I speak. There's a reason why the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is able to control its massive population. And you have to move people into cashless. And as long as we're trafficking in cash, there's no, paper trail on all my buying habits. But the moment everything becomes digitized, what books I read, what churches I support, what political causes I support is now on a paper trail. And that becomes the tool through which a totalitarian can say, okay, your behavior isn't quite as good as we would like it, so we're going to limit your opportunities in life. Your traveling privileges are now limited. Your passport privileges are limited. Your ability to get a loan for your business is now limited. Your ability to get your kids into the better colleges and universities, private schools, is now limited, and you're literally put in an electronic concentration camp where your opportunities in life dissolve. And that's the other side of this that people aren't seeing. This is all being sold to us as convenience, 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 and it is convenient. But every time you give ground to convenience, you're giving ground to the surveillance society. And one of these days, we know from Scripture, he's called the Antichrist, but one of these days, a person that is malevolent is going to get his hands on all this technology, and he's going to use it to create a social credit score system. And so, and the fact that they're bringing it in at the entertainment level, baseball, it's just beta testing is all it is. And they're desensitizing us to how we used to do transactions via privacy.
Yeah, this was in Philadelphia at Citizens Bank Park, where they used this in a game at the end of August. And I don't know, maybe they're just testing this out, they say, but there's so many other variables like you just mentioned, Andy, that we should be concerned about. I think it's going back, I don't know how many years, maybe even BC, before COVID, that Lambeau Field in Green Bay, Wisconsin here was cashless. I believe it goes back, that many years. But yeah, they're doing this, as you said, entertaining around the country, sports and other places, concerts, and they're just kind of getting us used to this. They use convenience as the argument, but boy, there are a whole lot more concerns that would kind of be a good debate for that idea of convenience. We only have a couple minutes left. You mentioned, obviously, Mark of the Beast technology, where people are going to be prevented from being able to buy, being able to purchase, being able to get goods and services, or even being able to sell. For some in our audience that are not familiar with that, we've just got a few minutes left. Andy, could you just give a little quick point of where that's found in the Bible and what that is all about?
Well, it's in Revelation 13, 16 through 18. And if people will read it, they'll see we're moving towards what it says. We don't believe that we're in it now because we don't have the beast or the Antichrist yet. You can't have the mark of the beast till you have the beast. But prophecies, Bible prophecies, are such that they don't happen in a vacuum. The stage is set well in advance. The population is desensitized well in advance. And so that's kind of the alarm that I'm seeing related to these things going on in Major League Baseball and other things. It's just desensitizing the population to move into the system. And what people need to understand is, yes, it's very convenient, but at the same time, there's another issue at stake, and that's personal privacy. And how much are we willing to sacrifice in terms of personal privacy on the altar of convenience? And if we make the wrong move here, we're going to end up in a place of subjugation. And so, and that scripture says that's where we're moving anyway. But that's my concern about issues like this.
Yeah, there are some in power that they're just going to try to take whatever we surrender to them, whatever kind of power we give them. And at what level, who knows how fast it's going to get there, but we're definitely seeing the signs. We're out of time already, Andy Woods, andywoodsministries.org. Just thanks so much for your teaching, your expertise, and for joining us on Worldview Matters today, brother. God bless you.
Yeah, David, thanks for having me. Congratulations also on the new platform.
Thank you so much. So, friends, we're going to just mention who we have the rest of the week here. We've got Scott Shera. We're going to talk about his daughter, Grace, and how she was murdered at a COVID hospital. Those are Scott's words, and we'll hear his story. Also, former homosexual George Carneal. He's got a book, From Queer to Christ. Also, John Haller, Prophecy Updates. He does amazing updates as well. So, talking to these men the rest of this week. Please subscribe if you haven't yet. WorldviewMatters.tv. We're on podcast platforms, Rumble. You can find us on YouTube and Freedom Project's Facebook page. Thank you guys again for tuning in and for your support. God bless you. And as always, keep speaking the truth about things that matter.